Thank you, Teresa. Let me call this meeting of the Town of Hilton Head Islands Planning Commission together, call to order. And first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And I have my flag here, guys. I'll start off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America,
and to the
republic
for which
it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I gotta quit trying to do two things at once here. All right, thank you for that. Teresa, may I ask, is the Freedom of Information Act, are we in compliance?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, great. Teresa, may I ask you to call the roll of the commissioners?
Yes, sir. Mr. Siebold? Mr. Alfred?
Present.
Mr. O'Neill?
Here.
Steve,
Mr.
you on? You here? Are we losing voice?
Yes, I do see Mr. Alfred is here.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Perry?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here,
Mr. D'Arienzo?
present.
Mr. Hens?
Here.
Mr. Scanlon?
Here,
And Mr. Collett is excused.
right, thank you. Our next item is to approval of the minutes of our last meeting. Does staff have any changes to the, next is the agenda. Let me get this straight here. Do we have any changes to the agenda for today's meeting?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Steve, is there a second?
Second.
Alan, thank you. Is already opposed? Okay, then let's have a vote on the agenda here. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of the agenda as we have it laid out before us. Any opposed? I don't see any opposed. The motion passes by a vote of 8-0. Let's move on to approval of minutes from the last meeting of October the 6th. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
So moved.
Our last meeting. So raise your hand. Mark moves his hand for, is there a second? Is there a second? Who said that?
Second.
Okay, that's from Rick. Thank you, Rick.
Yes.
Appreciate it. If you agree, raise your right hand if you approve the minutes. Anybody, all hands are in the air. It's approved by 8-0 vote. Appearance by citizens. Teresa, would you go ahead and fill us in on that?
Certainly. Public comments concerning agenda items were submitted electronically via the Open Town Hall portal. Those comments were provided to the Commission for review and made part of the official record. In addition to submitting comments on the portal, citizens were provided the opportunity to call into the meeting to comment on agenda items and non-related agenda items. However, there were no requests to give comments by phone. Thank you.
All right. The commission has no unfinished business before us, so we'll move on to new business. I believe the commissioners are aware that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock that the town council is having a workshop on the strategic plan, and I would encourage members of the commission, if they can, to pipe into that meeting. It's a Zoom call to get a feel for what town council and our town manager have in mind with regard to their strategic plan. And I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of that, and that we will try to see what, I know there's great interest on this commission regarding workforce housing. And so we'll see what their plans might include in the area of workforce housing. Under commission business, I have no new commission business that has come to my attention. So we'll move on to the chairman's report. I will be meeting with the mayor and the town manager, Mr. Orlando, regarding this strategic plan after it is announced tomorrow. And I'll be also meeting with various members of town council coming up to talk a little bit about the relationship between our plan, the planning commission actions itself, and our future actions, and also with regard to new ideas that a couple of the town council members have attended some interesting meetings regarding planning, and they're going to provide a briefing for me on some of the things that they learned at that particular session. And perhaps we can make it part of our continuing education effort to take a look at the presentation that those council persons saw. That concludes basically my report as chairman. May I ask if there are various committees? I'll go through the committee role here to see if any meetings have been held since our last meeting, and if so, what took place. So CIP, Mark, was there any actions there?
No, not yet, sir.
Oh, okay. John Campbell on comprehensive plan. Was there anything new since our last meeting?
Nope, nothing yet.
Okay. The Gulagichi Task Force, John, anything new there?
Nope,
Okay.
nothing there.
All right. Mr. Vice Chairman Perry, do we have anything new on the LMO committee?
We do not have anything new at this time.
Okay. Rules of procedure, Mr. Alfred, Commissioner Alfred, anything?
No
new?
meeting.
No meeting. Okay, fair enough. I think at this point we'll go right into staff reports. The first on our list is the Mid-Island Initiative Redevelopment Strategy Overview and Discussion presented by Jennifer Ray and also Brian Kinselman of MKSK. May I call on Jennifer to tell us about the Mid-Island Initiative?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me with you today. Jennifer Ray, for the record. I'm the Capital Program Manager. And I know that you've heard about this major project that Town Council has identified as one of their priority projects, but maybe don't have a lot of detail about it yet. Right. So the town hired MKSK to lead a team of consultants to prepare both a redevelopment strategy and plans for a new community park on the town-owned Mid-Island track, the former portion of the former Planters Row golf course. We have been kicking off the project, meeting with various stakeholders around the community, with town council, with staff, with the Parks and Rec Commission, and are here today to meet with you to kick off this project. I have Brian Kinselman and Tony Roll both on the call with MKSK. They're going to just kind of let you know a little bit more about the project, get any input that you have at this point as they start looking at the redevelopment strategy and the analysis that they've been conducting. And we will continue to come back to you periodically for updates along the way. I also, just before I turn it over to Brian, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, we have 2 opportunities coming up for the community to provide input as well. We're hearing from elected and appointed officials, but we have started a survey on Open Town Hall. It is live now on the town's website. A press release will be going out, and we're asking members of the community to go on and take that survey to provide some input. It will be live through mid-November. Additionally, on Tuesday, October 26th, from 2 o'clock until 6 o'clock, we will be having a drop-in event. We call them open park days. It'll be at the future park location outside, so we can be socially distant and enjoy this great fall weather. But it'll give you a chance. It's just a drop-in, so there's not a formal presentation, but some of the consultant team will be there with staff to also take input on the area around the park. So we've heard a lot about the 100-acre park itself, about what people want to see on that track, but this will give people a chance to talk about the larger district area and thoughts for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian and let him take it from here.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, members of town council, staff, public, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm with Tony Rell, one of my colleagues working on the project with me. Again, Tony's muted. We're working off of one microphone since we're sharing a room. Jennifer teed this up quite nicely. I'm going to step through this presentation. If I may, Jennifer, I'm going to ask for the screen, or I'll share my screen. How's that better stated? And I'm going to move with some pace through this, folks, but please feel free to stop me at any time. Jennifer had suggested I'm leading a team. You can see along the bottom right a number of sub-consultants, I'll call them subject specialists, from engineers, architects, traffic engineers, market analysts, and urban planners, being led by us, MKSK. You all have probably heard from me in the recent past relative to the 278 Gateway project and the work that we've been doing on behalf of the town, and I'm thrilled to be back in front of you. Jennifer had suggested that, again, this is a presentation we've given to town council, so I apologize. It's probably a few weeks out of total freshness. We've proceeded on with some planning heretofore, which we will be showing to you all in upcoming weeks. But I want to introduce you to our role, overview of the project, our schedule, which relative to the park is fairly aggressive, but certainly not recklessly so. Some early design thoughts and some for the park and also for the initiative area, and then outline some of the next steps. This is the cast of thousands, as I call it, our subject specialists. I am the principal in charge. Andrew Overbeck, our registered planner, is the project manager, and Tony is bringing his expertise, both management and planning, to the table, as well as all these fine folks at the bottom of the page. So I think the town is well advised to be looking at this framework plan for the initiative area while looking at the Mid-Island Tract Park. They're hand in glove, one feeds the other, as it were. So we're dealing with those in concert. However, internally, we're running on parallel and separate paths, with our landscape architects working on the park plan and our city planners working on the framework. But again, those two talk to one another, as they say. This schedule, again, as I mentioned before, is a few weeks out of date. We're on task one, which is the redevelopment strategy for the area, or the district, as I call it, is underway. We've met with a number of key stakeholders and are doing physical analysis and market analysis of the area. On the park, we have collected existing conditions of the park itself, worked through program elements, and are now starting to move some design scenarios around in plan view. Ultimately, the park goes to task 3, 4, and 5 moving forward. Once the town approves the park concept and the budget therefore, early in 2022, we will shift gears into final design, construction documentation, bidding, contractor award, and get this park under construction and get it built. The goal is to, toward the end of next year, 2022, of having that contractor identified and have the park ready for construction in the construction year of 2023. So you're seeing this at the front end for sure, and not the last time you'll be hearing from us. Jennifer and staff has done a great job of corralling stakeholders and interested parties. We had 2 days of back-to-back pretty intense conversations with folks, extremely useful. But we're also using not only the park visit, as Jennifer alluded to, but also social media and website posts to keep the public constantly informed as to what's going on the one hand, and also to take opinions on the other. And that offer certainly is open to this group. Any of you have any thoughts or concerns or issues or comments, I am happy to entertain that at any time. Some of the stakeholders that Jennifer has assembled, not lost on anybody on this call, but the park site is directly adjacent to the airport. The airport is seen some recent activity increase, to say the least, and there's plans for its airside expansion now that the landside expansion, now that the air side of the airport has been expanded. But we've heard from quite a range of constituents and have gotten some great input. Just to give you a sense of how we go about collecting that, it isn't just taking the written word or a social media comment, but we're constantly meeting with people and bouncing those ideas off of them. You all have invested treasure and time in doing some great plans and studies. We're not looking to remake those. We're taking all of the information that's been gathered in those and advancing that forward. But relative to the park, we're moving into park design, whatever that means. I'll come to that in a moment. Relative to the district, it's getting down to redevelopment opportunities, addressing some of the concerns of the day. We've heard a lot about the need for workforce housing. We understand that coming off of our Gateway project and the traffic and transportation ramifications of land uses. Again, we get that. So we're advancing all of these great, good studies, and they have been very, very useful to get us hitting the ground running, as they say. First, the planning initiative area. This gives you some sense of about 1.5 miles radius circle that is the quote unquote initiative area. We've begun to fine tune that because it isn't a perfect circle. It isn't as the crow flies. It's more about roadways and property ownership and plantation boundaries and historic neighborhoods and the like. So it's more of a informal line, but the notion is the same. We're looking at the parts of the town, dare I say, that are in between the plantations. And the island for the last 40 or 50 years has developed as a collection of communities along the parkway. And it's the stuff in between that largely we're dealing with. So we also understand that the drainage systems, the need for environmental stewardship, that's what has attracted us all to this island, is this magnificent environment and protection thereof with one hand, while we're planning for development and redevelopment with the other is the key to success. So as I suggested, we've got some collections of property. Most obvious is Northridge Plaza, Port Royal Plaza, Sea Turtle Marketplace, which is under redevelopment. Those are large land holdings. Some could suggest that maybe they've seen better days, and it's time, like any other type of development, to consider how those might redevelop over time. So we've got the luxury on the one hand, the challenge on the other as to how these large parcels may look in the future. We've got all the airport activity as that terminal expands and everything that goes along with the terminal. What does that mean to spin off development and some of the light industrial uses and distribution uses that are along Beach City Road and on that west side of the airport? Airport's an economic driver. We all know that, and it's got some spin-off opportunities we just need to understand and take advantage of. Again, the physical constraints of the airport are very real. Height, noise, development restrictions, those all need to be considered in our work. We've begun the market study. We've got some preliminary information back, but again, not lost on all of you that the retail world is changing quickly, has changed dramatically over the course of the last 10 years, certainly over the last 2 years. Again, we've got these largely retail holdings in the district that may have a higher and better and more responsive use to the island moving forward. Our service industry is obviously a strong consideration. Housing type, we've got some of the most magnificent single-family homes in the eastern half of the United States, but there are other housing types and price points that we need to consider for sake of workforce and maybe different economic levels. The neighborhoods, again, were defined, if you will, by the plantations of Palmetto Hall and Port Royal, but we also have the historic neighborhoods that surround this district and need to be considered as well. What's the best and most appropriate reuse for those? How do those communities feel about how they want their neighborhoods to develop out? We're not looking to be dictatorial. We're looking to be collaborative and understand what those needs are in those neighborhoods and how we can accommodate that from a plan standpoint. And then open space and trail connectivity. I mean, Hilton Head was the leader 50 years ago in a trail system and comprehensive greenways. We need to further that and maybe even further energize that. This park is no small part of that, but it's not just about the park. It's getting people to and from the park and from neighborhood to neighborhood. So the park planning and design, again, it's the core of the apple, as it were, a magnificent piece of property, not lost on any of you, 102 acres. We've begun to obviously analyze what's around it, but also physically what is on the site. The Ashmore Tract to the south, again, is a significant town holding. We think that's a great opportunity as well. From our standpoint, we're looking at the Mid-Island Tract and Ashmore as essentially being one tract of land. It happens to have a parkway that goes through it. The program, from a recreation standpoint, was largely developed by the island-wide Parks and Recreation Plan. You can see in the green image on the left, that is the boundary of the Mid-Island Tract, showing Crossings Park and Chaplain Community Park at the same scale. This defines what recreation programs have been identified for what piece of ground. We've got I'll say a very sensitive piece of property in the Mid-Island. Our goal is to attempt to fit as much program into the park as is appropriate, and what doesn't, find a home for it on the island for use by our citizenry. So we've looked at some other parks around the region just to have folks understand the scale of what we're dealing with. This Mid-Island Tract is 102 acres. Throw in the Ashmore Tract, and it's climbing up close to 200 acres of real estate. Forsyth Park in Savannah, I certainly do. Maybe you do as well. I've always envisioned that as being a big park. We're 3 times the size of that park on the Mid-Island alone. So the good news is we've got real estate. It's beautiful real estate. It's centrally located to the island. The opportunities are significant. We've got some ecological sensitivities, as you all understand as well. So part of the program is to keep as much of it as is practical as natural systems. And let's deal with the notion of eco-education and tourism, use that as an amenity, but also provide for the day-to-day activities of our citizenry, certainly trails and fitness connections to the neighborhoods, adjacent places for children and families to gather. Those don't take a whole lot of land mass, so they're not that invasive. They just have to be properly placed within a park. Some of the more active things, there's games, bocce, disc golf, horseshoes, table tennis, things that people gather, congregate as families, as colleagues. Again, don't take a lot of real estate. One exception to that is likely disc golf. We've got an existing golf facility on the Ashmore Tract. It's 9 holes of disc golf, and we'll see how that may fit into the Mid-Island. And then some of the more active things, some of which we've actually moved to other more active parks, being tennis and pickleball and some of the court games. But there is a demand for open field, not necessarily lit field or structured fields, but graded open lawn that we can play pickup soccer and pickup games on for family recreation, pump track for avid bicyclists. Again, that's not a huge land base, but we've endeavored, Jennifer, I'll put words in your mouth, we've endeavored to keep active recreation in the active parks and the more passive recreation in this park, which by its very nature is to be more passive. And then the pure civic and gathering places, a splash pad for kids, an event lawn for us to have art exhibits and holiday gatherings and celebrations. There's a great opportunity for food service in the park. Think of Tavern on the Green in Central Park, a place for people to gather, as we call it, eatertainment. People like to eat and drink, and people watch and listen to live music and congregate. That's just basic human nature. Places for pavilions, for seating, for maybe small wedding venues and gathering places within the park. So we've got that opportunity to satisfy a number of needs in 102 acres. And then we've got this great and deep history of the Gullah Geechee culture and heritage. We've got other historic aspects outside of that the island represents. We think there's a great opportunity to tell that story. Also to have public art display, to have various levels of gardens, whether those be structured and organized formal gardens down to more naturalized displays of native plants and everything in between. So again, we can satisfy these program elements, he says. So now to the physical layout of the park. You all know that this was a links style golf course. I recall it when it was of some repute, but that's been a few years ago since I played that golf course. But the fairways are cleared. Much of the rough area is left to native vegetation, and over time has been augmented by some plantings. There have been irrigation ponds dug. You'll see the water restrictions of the park in a moment. So there's a use and a need heretofore for those fairways. The concourse uses the fairways closest to Port Royal as event parking for that wonderful event that's put on every year. We can still accommodate that. We'll have to be very crafty and very strategic about that. The need for connectivity, just the pure crosswalks of the parkway, trail connections to the neighborhoods. How can South Islanders get to this park and North Islanders down to this park and everything in between? So we understand the system of Hilton Head roadways with trails adjacent. I think this may be an even more robust trail system through the park. Stormwater is an issue. We've got storm surge, we've got 500-year flood elevations. You all can see by the tan color of the park that the majority of the park goes underwater from time to time. So by definition, that limits development opportunities. Now, public parks go underwater all the time, but it's not good for conditioned architecture to go underwater. So to the extent that there are facilities in the park, we'll have to strategically locate those. We want to take advantage of the water. We want to take advantage of the storage and the filtration capacity of the entire site to raise the bar, so to speak, on the quality of the entire island relative to water storage and water management. So we may also take advantage of those ponds, interconnect those ponds for freshwater play of fishing and kayaking and canoeing and paddle boats, things that may happen in the plantations, but probably don't happen in our public park system and don't happen in dare I say, the safety of freshwater environments and not off the beaches. The St. James Baptist Church is being relocated to a corner of the park off of Union Cemetery and adjacent to the Union Cemetery. We'll be site planning that and dare I say, integrating it emotionally and physically into the park. So it's not a retail out parcel. It wants to take advantage of the park, and the park wants to take advantage of that fine facility. So we think that's a great benefit, just historically and culturally as well. So all of that being said, we've had some kickoff meetings. We've been through most of the stakeholder engagement. We've done we've done the majority of our analysis, physical analysis of the park. We're working to finish up the Mid-Island District market analysis and gap analysis for how that can inform the kinds of land uses that we need in the district and on the island. And we'll constantly be engaging the community, not the least of which is you all fine folks on your commission. So with that, I think I will answer any questions you might have. Tony, let me know if I missed anything, and Jennifer as well. I hope I didn't drag that out too long or go too fast.
Jennifer, Tony, do you have anything to add here before we go into questions?
No, sir, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
All right. Does Tony have anything he needs to add?
No, nothing to add here.
All right. Well, then we'll open it up for discussion among the members of the commission. I'm going to start with Alan, the Vice Chairman, Alan Perry. Alan, any questions or comments?
I've seen this before, so and I've been part of some of the discussion groups. I'm really excited to see what y'all come out with this in the next month or two. Just one thing, the percentage of the area that the 102 acres that you mentioned is underwater. What do you know what that percentage would be when that happens?
I should know, but I don't. I'll find that out for you all.
Yeah, because when we talk about architectural structures, obviously that limits the area with 102 acres. And if it's 60%, and then you take away 5 acres, it really limits what can be there that you don't want to have inundated with water. So I was just curious about that.
One thing relative to that point, sir, and that is obviously we can manipulate grades. We can fill sites to take them out of low water areas. We've got to be careful with that, but you all understand that. Also, the more grading we do, the more impact we have on the tree cover. So there's a fine line to walk between among all of those issues. But point well taken.
Hey, Commissioner Alfred, any questions?
What kind of facilities, if any, can be placed in the area that is subject to flooding?
Somebody's phone's ringing.
Virtually all of those recreation activities can be placed in all of those inundation areas. From time to time, a soccer field may go underwater. It's not going to be underwater for a month. Pray to God, it may be underwater for a matter of hours. And parks, golf courses, there's a reason why a golf course was here initially, because it was wetland. So there's a lot that we can accommodate within that inundation area. But if we go placing any conditioned architecture, it will either want to be on manipulated ground or ground that is above that inundation area.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner O'Neill. You're muted, Mark. You're muted.
Yeah, just for our education here, is there a working definition of what's meant by a passive park, either in terms of percentage of water or percentage of built buildings or any of those things?
No, there really isn't. There's no, dare I say, science to that. It's subject to interpretation. I do know that we've heard from constituency the desire to have a fairly robust program of eco education and take advantage of the very beautiful environment that we have. Couple that with the fact of the more the more uses that we can congregate about, that being groups of play, groups of gatherings, festivals, that type of thing. I liken that as being passive recreation. Again, the physical ground may go underwater from time to time in storm conditions, but there's a lot of the island that goes underwater in storm conditions, right? We've just got to be very strategic about that. So even things like formal gardens, from time to time, they're placed in flood-prone areas and subject to that periodic inundation. Good news is this is largely, if not exclusively, freshwater and not salt. So we've got to be careful of segregating the water so that we don't cause lasting damage.
Any other questions for Mr. O'Neill?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Campbell?
Do you have a prospective name for the park yet?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay.
I will say this relative to its location. We've been internally thinking of it as being the island's central park. We've got a beautiful community and island environment and some magnificent parks, but we don't have a central space on the island that one would drop a pin in on a map and say, there's the center of our town. Maybe this becomes the center of our town.
All right.
Anything else, John?
No, that's it.
All right, Commissioner Siebel.
Yes, this sounds like a really exciting project, and I'm glad to get to know a little bit more about it. Earlier in the presentation, Jennifer mentioned a date that would be available for a drop-in opportunity, and I didn't catch the date. Can somebody tell that?
That's going to be October 26th
Okay, thank you.
from 2 to 6. And I will just share too, as you all are going through your comments, there's a lot of focus on the park, and it's hard not to get real excited about planning a 100-acre park. And there's no shortage of ideas, but just a reminder, we're looking at a several mile wide district. And so if there are things that you all want to share, such as, workforce housing keeps coming up. Do we need more restaurants? Do we need better places to work? Do we need walkable areas? Do you want to think about that district too, not just the park proper, because the park is one tool in that redevelopment. There's shopping centers. What are your thoughts? Just thinking about some of the stuff that will come before the Planning Commission in the future, if there are zoning or land use changes, just food for thought to try to think beyond that 100-acre parcel as you give your input.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Bruce. Commissioner D'Arienzo.
Yes, thank you. So last week we heard a presentation about workforce housing, and it was mentioned that part of this park is being perhaps targeted for some workforce housing. Is that, I noticed it was on one of your slides, Brian, that workforce housing is a line item. Are you looking at that seriously as perhaps on some of the non-floodplain impacted areas?
Yeah, Brian, you're muted. Brian, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I try to mute myself as often as possible. I understand the question. We're looking at areas within the district, certainly for workforce housing. We haven't homed in on the park specifically for workforce housing. We think there's, before we get to the park, we think there's likely sufficient redevelopment opportunities in the district outside of the park to satisfy a workforce housing need. But we understand that there is a need for that. All we have to do is look at the travel patterns going over the bridge to the mainland, understanding that a lot more folks coming on the island than going off the island. And those are largely folks who are servicing us and working in our establishment. So we need to provide some housing for them for sure.
So
It's not-
reuse opportunities in one or both of those plazas. Is that what you're talking about within the district?
I think there's a lot more than that, Commissioner. I think there's other, dare I say, underutilized parcels. You all know on a day-to-day basis, we've got a number of areas, facilities, pieces of architecture that are getting towards the end of their useful life or have been re-tenanted, and maybe there's a higher and better use for them. It isn't just those plazas. Those are the obvious ones. But Matthews Road, Dillon Road, think about all the secondary and tertiary streets of the district. There's other places where I think market forces will determine that that redevelopment happens. The Ashmore tract alone has got some development opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hens.
Yes, Brian, thank you very much for your presentation. I really liked everything that I saw except for that picture of that big commercial building. So I was very happy to learn that much of the park's in a flood zone so that won't happen. So, but really enjoyed hearing your ideas for the park, and particularly excited to learn that you've got your eye on one of our significant challenges, and that's to come up with suitable workforce housing for the island. So your discussion about that at the end here was spot on. So thank you for that as well.
My pleasure.
Anything else, Tom?
Nope.
All right. Brian, I have a couple of questions and comments of my own here. And I'm voicing what I've heard from our constituents out there, the residents of Hilton Head, and a few tourist type comments as well. Let's go back to basics. First of all, I think most of us realize how this land came into the hands of the town after Matthew. And I guess the basic question is, was there ever a needs assessment done as to how many more acres of park this island needs?
I'm going to defer to Jennifer and the findings of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I believe that was covered in that plan.
You're correct, Brian. Part of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan did include an assessment of park space on the island, and that consultant made a recommendation to develop this tract as a park. And then that Parks and Rec Master Plan, as you know, Mr. Chairman, was folded into our plan as an appendix.
Okay. Well, that question's been asked of me several times in the recent weeks in people discussing what's going to be done with this property. My other question is, does it need to be 100 acres, or how much of this land can we dedicate to other issues? The parcel across the parkway, I've forgotten the name of it now. It was on the map.
Ashmore?
Yes, Ashmore. Would it be possible, in your opinion, are you going to use that as design park land over there as well, or is that going to remain as it is now?
Don't know, but it sure is under consideration. We're not taking the boundary of the park and saying that's all we're going to look at. As I said in my opening comments, the beauty of this whole process is that we're looking at the district, this entire area of the island. If we've got some recreational uses that logically fit in Ashmore, we'll consider them. If there's development opportunities there, we'll consider them. If that's better as open space and conservation, we'll propose that as well. So all those issues are on the table.
It has come into, people have indicated to me that possibly the Ashmore parcel on the other side of the parkway might be developed in part as workforce housing, and then to put a ramp, which is both a pedestrian and bicycle ramp, across the parkway into this parkland area. and to tie those two together so that the folks who are in that workforce housing that might be bordering the park would have access to it, and without having to cross over the parkway, in a pedestrian walkway. So I'm wondering, the commission probably would like to spend a little time on this in terms of maybe coming back with some recommendations. I would like to hear the strategic plan from our town manager before I think we finalize this discussion. And if it's, I'll put this to a vote of the commission, but it would be my suggestion that we discuss this again at a future meeting after we've seen the strategic plan more in detail, and come up with some recommendations from the planning commission as to what might be done with this parcel. But I do think we're a little ahead of the curve, and maybe at our next meeting, we could perhaps put that on our agenda. Is there any objection to that from members of the commission? Would you, show of hands, so the commissioners, would that be something you'd be interested in? Show of hands, if you'd like to have us take this up again at a future meeting after we have the strategic plan before us. All right, I'll take that as a majority vote. The other thing is parking. If you're doing a master plan for this particular parcel here, and I'm talking now just about the 102-acre tract, where would you put parking for people to access this park?
Well, you hit upon it. Every time you build a facility that attracts people, by definition, they largely come with their automobiles, and that takes 360 square feet per car to park it. So parking is going to have to be strategically located, just like everything else within that park. People, even those who are participating in active sports, don't like to walk very far from their automobile to a facility. Obviously, the less invasive onto the park space as possible is the goal. That suggests that there may be parking on the perimeter and allow people to walk into the park, but still we're going to have to provide conveniences. We're going to have to provide for service. We've got to empty trash receptacles, and if there's a restaurant here, it's going to have food service, and you're going to have handicap accessibility. So that whole infrastructure of parking and circulation is going to be dealt with just like and incrementally with all the rest of the program.
Additionally, Brian, is the corner where the cemetery is, right at the corner of Union Cemetery and the Parkway, on that corner, is that included in the 102 acres?
That is, the cemetery is not in the 102 acres, but the 5 acres that has been committed to the St. James relocation is part of the 102 acres. So the net would be 97 acres of park after the St. James piece comes out.
Yeah, I brought this up before at previous meetings in previous years, but I think that perhaps the road being named Union Cemetery Road, we know there are people buried there. I don't think we can identify exact places though. And I know that the cemetery on that corner has a lot of more recent graves in it. But I've always wondered why perhaps we wouldn't include a museum which would talk about the history of the island in both the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and all the other times when this has been occupied territory. So I wondered if that might be something that you all would consider as part of the plan. And what if in the design and building of any park structures, if we were to come across a burial site of a soldier, I mean, how is that going to be handled?
Well, if we come across any archaeological site and grave site, we're certainly going to have to modify the plan to accommodate that or deal with it appropriately and transparently. So that's punctuation on that statement. I think you're absolutely spot on the history and the culture of the whole island, but specifically this part of the island. my light bedtime reading over the course of the last couple months has been delving into the history of the island and the Gullah Geechee culture and the post-Civil War activities and settlements and the importance of Mitchellville. This is more than just a collection of neighborhoods. These native islanders, as many call them, there's a very real and distinct history and culture that I think adds richness to the whole place.
I do think that knowing our history, especially in the Civil War, but in other areas as well earlier, that we have a history here and we probably should be proud of it. And we probably should put it on display, not only for our residents, but for all the 160,000 tourists a week who pour in here. So that's something I would hope that you guys would focus on as you proceed. Rather than drag this out any longer, we have, I think, committed the board to coming back and taking a look at this again as your plans develop. And also after we have a chance to see how this land might fit into the strategic plan that town council and the town manager are putting together. Okay, I thank you, Brian and Jennifer, for your presentation here today. Are there any other questions before we close this piece of business? Okay, commissioners, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
Thank
Jennifer.
you, folks.
All right, we'll move on to our second area this afternoon, and that is the short-term rental ordinance overview and discussion presented by Terry Lewis and also Tyson Smith and Kelly Crisino, excuse me, of White and Smith Planning and Legal. So at this point, I would turn it over to Terry and have you take us through this. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be able to present to you today. We're going to talk about the short-term rental ordinance initiative, which is another initiative of town council. I want to start out just by letting everybody know, though, I think when they hear ordinance, that they think there's an ordinance already drafted and that that's what we're bringing forward. And we're not right now. Right now, we are in the data collection and data assessment phase. We are trying to reach out to as many stakeholders and other groups as possible to get information, get public input, to do community outreach. We developed a list of focus groups, and we've been starting to meet with those. And as part of that, we wanted to reach out to the Planning Commission and share the project with you, share what we're doing, introduce our consultants, and then also get input from y'all on what you're hearing from the community and what you've observed related to short-term rental units on the island. So the town contracted with White and Smith Planning and Law Group, and we've been working closely with Tyson Smith and Kelly Crisino to start to develop a program to collect data, to start to meet with people. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. They're going to take you through a presentation to give you a little bit of the experience they've had working on short-term rental ordinances in other communities, and let you know where we're going with the project.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name is Tyson Smith. I'm a co-owner at White and Smith Planning and Law Group. We're a national planning firm, and we work with cities and counties around the country on zoning codes and zoning code updates and land use planning across the board. We have a handful of clients that are legal clients, but we're primarily a planning firm. I happen to be located in Charleston, along with Kelly Crisino, who's with us this afternoon. Kelly and his urban planner with us, and also Sean Scootmeyer is with us as well. Sean is a planner and attorney with White and Smith, and he's in Greenville, South Carolina. So with that, we're going to go through a few slides. This will probably take us about 15 minutes, but our goal is to give you some sense of the background of the study, but more importantly, some of our experience working with communities that were concerned about short-term rentals for any number of reasons. And we know, of course, there are many issues that are relevant and important when you take on this type of issue. So we'll go through that, and there'll be time at the end for discussion. There'll be a couple places that'll be a logical spot to stop and see if you have any questions, and we'll do that as well. Okay. There will be a few people involved in the project in addition to myself and Kelly and Sean. My business partner, Mark White, has worked on short-term rentals in a number of places around the country, including Charleston County. He's down there at the bottom left. We also have Reese Wilson assigned to this project. Reese is a planner and a graphic designer, and he may be involved in some of the deliverable output as well, depending on what that ends up being. As I said, we've had this issue, frankly, comes up in almost every community now, whether or not it's a resort community. That wasn't true 20 years ago when I had my first exposure to this issue, when I was an in-house planner for the city of Key West. And the issue of short-term rentals arose. And of course, we were, 15, 20 years, I don't know, away from Airbnb. So that's when I first became involved in it and led some subcommittees of the City of Key West Commission on the topic. And then in 2002, I was in the consulting business by then. I was actually in Kansas City with a different firm, but they the town of Kiowa Island hired us to come out and work with them in developing their initial program regarding short-term rentals. Now, you probably are aware that that program has developed significantly in the last 20 years. But we worked with them to rule in and rule out certain approaches at that time. We'll talk a little bit about Kiowa here in a minute. And then here's a list of the rest of our experience, some of it in South Carolina, some of it in other places. And Kelly and I both will touch on some of these here in a moment. Our scope of work right now involves data collection, data assessment, which is a community outreach effort along with background research and data analysis. This is where we are now. As Terry said, there's no official direction from us, from the town council or from the public planning committee. Our task now is simply to listen and to start vetting ideas or thinking about ideas that might be brought forward to the town council to get guidance from it. Our next phase, once we complete this, and we're thinking this will probably be sometime after the first of the year, is developing a system or a series of alternatives, and then conducting a community facilitation process to vet that through the community, the public, and the town council to get some feedback on what a program might look like and how it would like us to do an initial drafting effort, assuming it decides to move forward with something, and that would be phase 3. And then finally, of course, phase 4 would be putting that program through the adoption process that's typical for any revisions to the LMO. We met with the Public Planning Committee, I think about 3 weeks ago. We've done so much since then, it seems like 2 months ago. And we had a good meeting with them, very long meeting, and got a lot of input from a lot of different perspectives, I think, on this issue. By the end of our time with the committee, however, the committee felt it was important that it articulate a purpose statement for this project as it saw it. And this is what they developed: to develop a fair, predictable, balanced approach to manage short-term rental impacts on our neighborhoods, economy, housing stock, public facilities, and the quality of life of our residents and experiences of our visitors. I think that statement sums up pretty well the range of issues that come up. Each of those issues will have its own range of perspectives, of course. But that idea of having something predictable and balanced is one that I think has run through all the focus group meetings that we've had. So more on that in a minute. Very quickly here, some of the ways that communities who have decided to address short-term rentals, notably many don't, and that has its own challenges. For those who have, we'll go through a few of the tools here, and then we'll talk about some of our experiences in a few specific places. The first bullet here is one that really highlights the problem that, or the reason the way that this issue bubbles to the surface, I guess is the way I would put it, because a zoning ordinance doesn't address this idea at all. And the community is left to guess, well, is this a bed and breakfast? Is this interval? Is this a resort accommodation? And if you get to a very large houses, like we see in some resort places now, it seems like a hotel, is it? And you're reading these old definitions and you're in this situation where nobody knows exactly what applies. So that's the first thing that most communities do. And then other things that some communities get into are income reporting and taxes, licensing fee requirements, which Hilton had just adopted. Some will address the duration of stay that's required to be defined as a short-term rental, or the number of short-term rental occupancies that can occur during a year or during a month. Some impose occupancy limitations, and we have some examples of that in South Carolina. It's always important in these communities, in some of these communities, to know who to call if there is a concern so that it can be addressed. Mitigating some of the impacts, what we hear in communities are concerns about the housing stock. We're finding that the hotel, of course, the hotel and accommodations industries are being impacted by this, and they're making their own adjustments, and we can talk about that. But impacts on the neighborhoods, neighborhood character, and tenant safety, of course, comes up. Now, ways to address these things are through the zoning code. Hilton Head Island, of course, is pretty unique in the way, and this came up in the last presentation, in the way that it's laid out. Everything is subject to the town rules, of course, but you've got these individual communities that, in essence, have their own expectations, their own character, and in many cases, their own rules. So that's the type of thing we'll be working our way through and being mindful of as we structure any kind of recommendations. Kiowa Island and others control the density of short-term rentals that are allowed by zoning district or by plan district or by the entire jurisdiction. We'll touch on some of those in a minute. Places like City of Charleston, owner occupancy is required so that the owner is around and again can respond to any complaints. Manager managed is the type of short-term rental that some communities prefer. They find that in that case, they're more responsive, limiting on the number of bedrooms that can be in a home that's rented out short-term. And then of course, there's a whole host of behavioral, quote unquote type of issues you hear about: noise, parking, trash, towels being hung on the railing, these sorts of things. So I'll go over a couple of jurisdictions here, and then I'm going to switch over to Kelly, and she'll cover a couple, and that'll be a good time to stop and see if there are any questions at this point. You can tell by the way these slides look, this was a long time ago. These were done in the early days of short-term rentals and the early days of PowerPoint. These slides are from our work with Kiowa Island in really 2002, 2001, 2002 timeframe. And as you can see from each of these slides, we went through different subjects with the town council that time and just asked them. And these were slides that we used to facilitate our input sessions with the council. When it comes to regulatory provisions, should things be different between the zoning districts? What about regulatory mechanisms and approval processes? Would they be different? And are the land use impacts that short-term rentals create felt the same way in each of the three residential districts? And if you're familiar with their program, you know that the answer was that they were different, and they in fact, do treat each of those zoning districts differently. In Kiowa, a business license is required. There are operating requirements that go along with that. And there are caps on short-term rentals in the R1 and R2 district. And that cap, that number is denominated by licenses per developable lot, because much of Kiowa is still developing. There are notice or rules required, and a local contact is required. There are occupancy limits. I believe I'm not going to guess. I think it might be 4 per unit. Parking and outdoor lighting standards apply. Trash collection requirements and enforcement procedures are very clear. Now, I will say, of note, in 2002, all of these weren't the case. But over the years, these restrictions got to become a longer list of them. But the program also, I would say, just in a sense, matured. This is their website now, and this, I think, is something that, as we've spent time over the last 3 weeks talking, I see as something that I think the town of Hilton Head would want to consider and rule in or rule out. It's not super complicated, but it is very detailed and very easy to use. You arrive on this landing page and you kind of know which of the 3 boxes to click. And it's very welcoming. There's nothing about this website that seems off-putting or resistant to those who are visiting the island, but simply a way to facilitate. And again, I think this gets to that predictability. So if I'm a homeowner and I want to rent my home as a short-term rental, I know where to apply this box, here. Here we are. If I'm a property owner and I have a complaint, you're there on the right. And if you're a renter, you're welcome in this town, but here's sort of what you can expect when you get here. If you click on that middle one, you'll then be switched to a page here. And again, this is fairly detailed, and it walks you exactly through the process of applying for a license and how it works. And the reason I bring this up is, of course, Hilton Head and Kiowa are both, visitor oriented, different scales. That's obviously a point of discussion in the community. Short-term rentals is probably impacting that. But nonetheless, the second, so it came to mind for that reason. But the second thing is, again, just that transparency, that ease of understanding what the rules are. So if I'm a neighbor and there's a party going on, it's 11 o'clock at night, I can learn very easily, are they violating anything? Or do I just need to, turn up the stereo for 30 more minutes? Or do I know that, yeah, it's time for everybody to be quiet and there's a number I can call? So again, wherever this community, your community falls on this issue, we don't know yet, but I think making it clear is useful. City of Charleston is the same way. It has the same type of thing. They have a website and it's even more involved. As you can see here, you land on this landing page here, short-term rental information. If you click on is my property eligible, it's very straightforward. In fact, I live in an area in downtown Charleston where this is the case. So I would click on that and it walks you right through almost with the Q&A here to arrive at an answer of whether you can rent. So as you might imagine, Charleston, but like places like Kiowa that are really growing quickly and starting to have many, many issues, is a complex place. But I think this is and they have very challenging complex issues. But I think this is an example of them taking what is admittedly a very complex short-term rental program, but simplifying it for the people in the community so they can make their way through it. And then just very quickly, the program in the city of Charleston, I'll just kind of point out some of the things that are different. Owner occupied by permanent residents, so not second homeowners. And the owner has to own the lot. It has to be an exempt homestead property. We will inevitably confront the question of what do you do about those that are in existence, and then you get into further complicated questions like we did in Kiowa. Well, how do you determine if they're in existence? But at any rate, in the city of Charleston, they decided that when they adopted new rules, they applied to everyone. That if you had an existing short-term rental up to this point, and you can't comply with the new rules, then it can't continue. But I will tell you, that's a different decision point in every community. Their parking requirements to ensure that parking is addressed, cap on the number of occupants. Here's the 4. I'm not sure if Kiowa is the same. 4, regardless of relationship. And that's clearly getting at an enforcement issue there. You don't want to be out there asking people for their licenses and who they're related to. We'll spend a lot of time on enforcement here. And there are a lot of things that communities have done to address that initial reaction that, well, we can never enforce that. But you'll find that communities have found a way, at least partially, at least enough to make it worthwhile. The host has to be generally available. So my interpretation of this is that I could rent out another property that I own in Charleston, but I have to be available within 2 hours, to respond. 2 hours to respond to a complaint. There are life safety issues addressed. Charleston has a fairly sophisticated enforcement mechanism, and that they have complaints go through a livability court here, and they have had a number of complaints that have gone through that. And then finally, just to show you how it stacks up, you have a short-term rental overlay, which is this sort of royal blue area here in downtown Charleston. This is the most commercial area. This is where the crosstown passes through, so it's a pretty intense area of the peninsula. And that's where short-term rentals are basically allowed. You have to get a permit, but they're not a lot of limitations. Now, in the Old and Historic District is Category 1, this purple area down here, of course, with Broad Street and the park and the older part of the peninsula. The only type of house that can be used for short-term rentals are those that are on the National Register of Historic Places. So that's a branding issue. I mean, I'm guessing, I wasn't involved in this project, but I think that was one that said, hey, we're going to allow these things, but we want it to be part of the visitor experience. And in downtown Charleston, that's what it means. Similarly, Category 2, the sort of pink area up here, short-term rentals are allowed, but you have to be in a building of at least 50 years old. So again, that historic idea. And then finally, the rest of the city, which most of you probably know goes off the peninsula, short-term rentals weren't allowed under their interpretation prior to them taking up the issue. So what Category 3 did was it made it very clear that short-term rentals are now allowed in these off-peninsula parts of the city of Charleston. Okay, that's a lot to take in, and I'm going to switch things over here to Kelly, but I'll stop and see if there are any questions yet. Yes, sir.
The commission, without objection, I think what we'll do is keep moving and save our questions till the end, if you don't mind.
Of course. Very good. Kelly?
Kelly's muted.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Tyson. I just wanted to take y'all through some examples of a few projects that we've worked on with regard to short-term rentals in South Carolina that just represent a range of different approaches. Starting here with York County, which is up on Rock Hill, Fort Mill, around the border with Charlotte. We are in the process of revising the county's zoning and subdivision ordinances. And as you can imagine, short-term rentals aren't a huge issue in York County. They do have some, but they tend to be in the cities rather than in the unincorporated parts of the county. But the county, we've seen some changes with COVID and an increase. They're starting to see an increase in short-term rentals, and the county wanted to get out in front of the issue, but they really wanted to take a minimalist approach to it. So we've proposed some very simple use regulations that just require an owner registration requirement, mainly so that the county can track short-term rentals and where they're located. And that also helps with enforcement. There's an annual limit for each short-term rental unit of 120 days per year. So there's just 128 days over the course of the year. There's a restriction on the number of guests, and interestingly here, the staff was interested in having a daytime occupancy limit and then a nighttime occupancy limit. So we've proposed that simple restriction. And then going back to the issue of just clarification and making sure everybody understands, it clarifies that these regulations only apply to rentals that are less than 30 days, so they don't have any effect on longer term rentals than that. Kind of going up the scale in terms of complexity is the town of Mount Pleasant. Before I started with White and Smith about 5 years ago, I spent 12 years as a planner with the town of Mount Pleasant. And before last year, the zoning code did not specifically address short-term rentals. That led to the interpretation of owner-occupied short-term rentals. Say you're renting out a room in your house or perhaps an accessory dwelling unit. Those were considered bed and breakfast, which required an extra layer of approval, a special exception, public hearing by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then non-owner occupied short-term rentals, maybe you live, someone lives elsewhere in town or lives out of state, or perhaps a house is owned by an investment company. Those were just considered a permitted use. It was a single family dwelling use, and there was no additional review required. And during, after Airbnb started to get a little more popular, it became evident to the town that this wasn't the direction the community wanted to head. The community really felt more comfortable with owner-occupied short-term rentals and just the idea of having the property owner there to help with help control some of those behavioral issues that the neighborhoods were experiencing, like parking and noise. Last year, the town did implement some short-term rental regulations. We were not a part of that, but we've taken a look at their ordinance, and they, like the town of Kiowa Island, they do limit the total number of short-term rental permits on an annual basis. And this is a town-wide limit of 400 annual permits. Population's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90,000 right now. I'm not sure how many dwelling units there is, but it's a fairly small number for the size of the town. An annual permit is required. You have to have a business license as well as liability insurance. A lot of the town's regulations, while there is an occupancy limit per unit and an additional parking space is required, most of their regulations really focus on safety. Property owners are required to sign an affidavit that their unit complies with fire safety criteria, another acknowledgement that the property owner is aware of the laws and rules that apply to short-term rentals. And then tenant notices were also a big deal as well, so that people who are renting these units know what the laws are and what's expected of them as a short-term renter. And then finally, Charleston County. This one is a little more complex of a program than the last two I touched on. But White and Smith is part of a team that is updating Charleston County zoning and land development regulations. And part of that was developing a short-term rental ordinance for the county. They also have a tiered approach, but it's based on the number of rental days per year. There's a limited home rental that's allowed in most, if not all, of their residential zoning districts. Does require owner occupancy, but it limits the total number of nights that the units can be rented to 72 days total per year. There is a site plan review required, but there's not, a board or commission meeting to go to. And you get up into the next tier, which they call an extended home rental, and it's allowed in some of their agricultural districts. The county is very focused on agritourism. And then some of the higher density residential districts. Those are limited to 144 days per year and require approval by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So there's a public hearing process that goes into that one. And then finally, the last tier is commercial guest house, which is allowed in some of their commercial districts and some of the transitional districts, office related districts you might see kind of between neighborhoods and commercial areas. There are a lot fewer limitations on these types of uses. There's no owner occupancy requirement. It's really treated more like a hotel in those districts. The county also requires an annual permit and a valid business license. Like some of the other communities, there is a big focus on tenant safety and tenants understanding what the rules are. They do require an extra parking space. And then interestingly, they chose to deal with non-conforming or existing short-term rentals with a 5-year amortization program. So it sort of phases out existing short-term rentals over a period of 5 years if the property owner either doesn't want to continue it or is unable to comply with the new regulations. Fine. Tyson, did you want to pause here or do we want to talk next steps?
Members of the commission, would you like to come in with questions at this point or hold on?
I do have a question, if you don't mind, Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
So Hilton Head Island's maybe a little bit different than some of the other communities you worked in, some of the other cities of Kiowa and Charleston. And as far as I know, each of the 13 plantations here on Hilton Head Island control how they handle short-term rentals. For instance, where I live, Port Royal Plantation, we do not allow any short-term rentals. The shortest term of rental is available is 6 months. And as a result, that's one of the reasons why Port Royal Plantation is very popular for residential as a community for the landowners. And so my question is, are you looking at all of the communities as part of this study? And what is the driver behind this particular effort that you've been commissioned to partake in?
Well, let me answer the first question, and then Terry can respond to your second question. Yeah, we have, and we should go over this as specifically, we've met with a number of different groups so far, including single family neighborhoods as such, planned unit developments or the plantations or communities, as you're saying, rental management companies, realtors, Chamber of Commerce, the Hilton Head Area Home Builders Association. So we have gotten certainly a range of feedback, and we are aware that some of these homeowners associations address short-term rentals themselves, and they are treating them differently, as y'all probably are aware. So in terms of that framework, we are aware of that. Yes, sir.
We are getting information. So we did meet with the PUD general managers, and we are reaching out to those that have short-term rental ordinances in place. We're just getting different information. We certainly have a couple that said, we're happy to meet if you want us to, but we don't allow short-term rentals. So, we're not going to change that, but we are exploring whether it will be something that would apply island-wide. Would it, would it only apply outside the gates? Now, I will tell you, like, we have talked to a couple where they said, we've developed some regulations, but there are a couple of things that we can't do through, through what we've set up. So we would be interested in what the town could provide as well. But we're certainly not going to come in and suggest that we override something that, let's say like Port Royal, for example, that they've decided not to allow short-term rentals. We're not going to come in and say that that's a place that they would be allowed. One of the other things that we're doing as part of this data collection is we're going to contract with somebody to get us some real data. We know where, we kind of generally know where short-term rental units tend to be, but we want to know exactly where they are, and we want to know exactly how many we have on the island, and that'll help guide, what town council decides to do as well.
All right, thank you.
How many, may I ask Tyson and Kelly, how much longer do you have in your presentation? I take it there's more?
We just have one more slide where we're going to tell you what you can expect between now and the end of the year.
All right, let's do that.
Okie doke. Kelly, we'll cover that.
Sure. So these are immediate next steps for the project. The first is to complete this phase that we're in now, data collection and community outreach. That will include a virtual open house where we'll get feedback from anybody who wants to attend. Terry and town staff are also working on an open town hall survey that will be on the town's website where people can provide input. Tyson and I we've both been to Hilton Head Island a number of times, but we do plan to come down and see y'all in person or see the community in person again. And then once we've concluded this first phase, we do plan to present all the stakeholder input that we've received to the Public Planning Committee and Town Council for their information.
Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation, for your time, Tyson, Kelly, and Sean. I'm going to open it up to the commission for questions or comments. We'll start with Commissioner Hens.
All right, well, Tyson, Kelly, thank you very much. That was a very informative presentation. I've got mixed emotions on the topic of short-term rentals. I live in a neighborhood that has short-term rentals, and it's not the best. I'd certainly rather have full-time neighbors, and for various reasons, it can be, it's just not as good as having neighbors. It's not the same neighborhood. But having said that, my family has certainly enjoyed vacations where we take advantage of short-term rentals, and have had just some of the best times for the family. So again, mixed emotions, and I guess if I had to offer my thoughts, it would be, hey, you all have been working on this a long time. Let's start with what you did with Kiowa and use that as a model for Hilton Head, and perhaps we need to make adjustments to that structure, but seems to me that might be a good place for us to start.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rick D'Arienzo. I'm going to get that name down right.
All right. No problem, but nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Seabold.
Just thanking the Tyson and Kelly for a great presentation, but no questions.
All right. Commissioner Campbell.
I have a question. Are you taking into effect the RV lots around here too? Are you considering that as short-term rentals?
We're not excluding anything. I don't think RVs have come up yet. So tell me what your thought is, Mr. Campbell.
No, I mean, you get a lot of traffic from RV lots here on the island. People use them as weekly rentals. So I was wondering.
Well, sure, we'll definitely be looking at that issue then.
Okay.
We're considering it in that respect.
Commissioner O'Neill. You're muted up there, Mark.
I too will get this down someday. I don't know when. It's a different question, different way of asking Rick's question, which is simply which jurisdiction takes precedent when we're talking about the gated communities. Let's say a rule comes up that the town wants to change a rule, and the the gated communities bylaws and or covenants or anything else preclude whatever that recommendation is going either way. Who really has the say here?
Well, the general rule on this issue is that if a local government zoning ordinance disallows something, a homeowner's covenant can't allow it. If the zoning code allows something, the homeowner's code can disallow it under contract agreement. It's not through zoning law. There's a section, unfortunately, in the South Carolina statute that was passed in about 2007 that muddies the waters here. It basically says, this is a classic waffle. I mean, it says that the local planning department is supposed to inquire about any conflicting covenants on a piece of property before they issue a permit. And then they are not supposed to issue something if there is something like a conflict related to it. So it's not real clear what the local government is supposed to do. I will say this, having worked in a number of communities in the state, everybody handles this differently and it doesn't usually come up. So I think the goal, I would think, of the council in this regard would be to be very clear about what applies and what doesn't, what the intent is, so there's just not any muddied waters after that. But the simple answer to your question is that the zoning rules trump from a regulatory point of view.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alfred.
I assume that at this stage, you are looking at gated communities as well as the rest of the community, although I thought I heard Terry say something which threw that in doubt.
I would say this, we're looking at whatever the town council wants us to look at. And I understand from the town council's point of view, they're looking at the entire town.
Okay. Now, there is a wide variety of housing in Sea Pines, which I am most familiar with, and is one of, I estimate, as the two large private gated communities that have short-term rentals. And there's a good deal of variety. There are condo buildings with dozens and dozens of units that are rented for the great portion of the year. And anything that would limit that would be entirely different than what the practice has been now for many years. And I'm not sure would accomplish very much. There are also very large homes in the oceanfront area where there could be a very large number of short-term rentals taking place with a very large number of tenants and a very large number of cars. And then there are smaller single-family homes that I might guess that the biggest problem is adequate parking. Is it the intent to develop different approaches to different types of situations, such as those I just mentioned?
I would expect so, yes, sir. We know that they're all different, that housing behaves differently, and the impacts are different in each community. So we would tailor any recommendations to the council accordingly.
I assume that one of the harder matters to comply with is a smaller single-family home that doesn't have enough parking space, because all they've got is their driveway, and probably not a good idea to have street parking. They may not be able to do very much about the absence of adequate parking. Does that mean that by necessity, they're going to get phased out as a likely possibility?
Well, that will be a question put to the town council, but that is the discussion we will inevitably have. Yes, sir.
Okay. What I have heard in limited conversation with members of the community are two things. One is that they're not aware that there is a current study going on, okay. And those who are engaged in short-term rentals right now jump immediately to the conclusion you can't do that to me. And I'll sue and so forth. I understand from hearing your presentation earlier that you have a legal position as to what you can do to people on a retroactive basis.
Sure. Yes, sir. As I said, the question of grandfathering, investing will inevitably come up. The rules that, the tools that we put out on this list earlier and the things we've kind of covered very quickly today, for the most part are available to the town council if they want to exercise them. But we're certainly aware, and they're going to be aware, that to the extent they change the rules that exist today, that's going to have a bigger impact than if they change the rules moving forward. But every community has to decide, as Kelly said. Mount Pleasant has an amortization provision that phases out non-conforming units. Sullivan's Island, it was that way when Sullivan's Island decided to address short-term rentals probably 15 years ago. They capped the number that existed, and it's very strict. They can't be transferred or anything. So if someone voluntarily stops using it, it goes away. So I don't mean to go on, but I follow your points, and those are things that have to be addressed. What I will try to do for you all, and for those we're working with in the community over the next, probably 8 to 10 months, is to distinguish between what is a political decision, so to speak, or what is a policy decision, we might say, and what is a legal decision. And all legal options won't be supportable in the community, but that doesn't make them illegal. So where we can, I'll try to draw that distinction for you.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little bit concerned about developments of a more recent nature as a result of the coronavirus, which is, I suspect there have been a number of people who have purchased houses here, which they don't intend to spend an awful lot of time in, and rent out in the meantime. And so You're going to have a lot of people who are going to be a little bit surprised that we're going down this path.
Thank you, Steve. Vice Chairman Perry.
Thank you. Tyson, Kelly, appreciate the presentation. I understand that there's a plethora of amount of information that you still have to garner to even begin to understand what it is that you would recommend. One of my first thoughts is, wow, what a can of worms. It is such a challenge to try to address the 800-pound gorilla, and that is quality of life for residents and also providing a quality of life for the visitors. And as Mr. Alfred just said, those individuals that have recently purchased properties here on the island with the intent for it to be a second home with some short-term rentals to help pay for it. That is our economic driver, and it has been our economic driver since day one. So I look forward to the information that you're able to pull in from these focus groups that you're going to have. And I know that you're going to get a resounding difference of opinions from so many different groups. I hope that when the presentation is made to council, they really spend a lot of time and understand the direct effects that it has for everybody around here and what it means for our community. I'm glad I'm here to receive the information from you and not be the one to dive into it. But it is a unique community, and from the communities that you showed, I don't see that you really dealt with a community like this. Kiowa, while similar, it doesn't have the different PUDs within the island that we do, and also the PUDs outside that I would call the unincorporated areas of Hilton Head, such as some of the condos and stuff. So I look forward to how you put this together and how you would make a recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Perry. Lastly, on my own behalf, I would say that if you're planning to come down to Hilton Head and get some opinions, you better plan a 13-day trip and visiting with the POAs of all the 13 plantations and gated communities, because the existing rules in each are very different. Some would like to change their rules. Some would like to toughen them up. the town might be able to provide a spine for some of these communities who want to get tougher. And if they say, well, the town's doing this, we got to go along with it. For example, parking is a perfect example. There are an awful lot of rentals, short-term rentals that are just, they're parking in the streets and driving the neighbors, the full-time residents crazy. I take it when you say short-term, you're talking about less than 30 days. That's just my assumption. Is that correct?
Well, it's different in every community, but 30 days is typical. Some have said 7, but 30 is pretty typical, but that will be a bridge we'll have to cross here.
Okay. Well, listen, unless there are other questions, if anybody on the commission has a second go round question, raise your hand and I'll get to you. Otherwise, I want to thank you for your presentation. There's a lot to be done in this area, but I don't think you're going to find a commonality among all these different gated communities, let alone the in-between areas. It would be my suggestion that you meet either over the Zoom call or in person with these POAs in the various gated communities and find out what their existing rules are. And I think you might be able to put together a quilt of things that they would like to get tougher on and things that they want to stick to, including not doing it at all. So the town could maybe come up with something that would be a baseline, and then each community could take it from there if they wanted to get more stringent. All right. Thank you, Tyson and Kelly and Sean. We appreciate your participation. And Terry, thank you for scheduling this in for our meeting today. I don't know that we have any action that we're going to take on this at this time, but we look forward to getting an update from time to time on how this is proceeding. So I would ask you to come back before us and explain how things are developing. Would you please? All right. If there is no other business before the commission, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all for your participation. Good afternoon.